So today's plays then are were Agamemnon. But I should have checked how to pronounce these names, but I think it's Aeschylus for Agamemnon and Euripides as our playwright for Medea. I should have probably given you guys Aeschylus first in the class before Sophocles, because quite frankly, he was before Sophocles in the playwriting tradition. You can kind of tell that he was because his plays are a little rough around the edges, right? I don't know if you guys got the sense when you were reading it, but the chorus kind of goes on for pages and pages and pages, right? It's kind of like you get the chorus giving you all this exposition, and then you get random tidbits of dialogue, and then the chorus goes off on another tangent again. That's kind of how the Agamemnon is written compared to Sophocles and even Euripides, where there's a lot more action happening all at once. Like there's much more dialogue and things like that. As I was preparing for class, because frankly, I was reading Agamemnon for the first time along with you guys probably. I've read about it. I knew what it was about, but I've never sat down to read it till now. Frankly, it's a pretty tough read. Especially getting through all that stuff with the chorus, and like I was kind of dozing off reading it, right? But I don't think that's Aeschylus's fault as much. I mean, he's the first. He's one of the first pioneers of ancient drama, so it's a little easy to see how his would be a little rough around the edges. I don't know how did your guys' reading experiences go with Agamemnon? Do you mostly agree with me on that one?
Yes, I definitely do agree with you on that one.
It's fun. It's fun when we get to the action, right? But there's not a lot of action. There's just a lot of in between. Zach, Brianna, how'd you guys feel when you were reading through Agamemnon?
It was a lot harder for me to understand than the other ones we've read, but once I got to the end, I was understanding more of it.
Right. And once the action picked up.
Yeah, I agree that it did start off pretty slow, and yeah, it was just a slow read for me.
Yeah, it's a cool story, but it's definitely a slow burn. To give you guys a little bit of the context behind the story, like we talked the first week or so of class about the Trojan War and all that stuff, but Agamemnon was actually the king of the Greeks, of all the unified Greek cities during the Trojan War in the myths. So while he was over there, like he actually caused a plague because he took a concubine, and Apollo took exception to that because his concubine was Apollo's oracle. So Agamemnon took her as a war prize. And Apollo then cursed the Greeks with a plague. And he caused all this death. And Agamemnon didn't really want to give the concubine's name was Briseis. This is all in the Iliad if you read the Iliad. But he took Briseis, and when he was forced to give her up, he pouted and just told Achilles, like, I'm going to take your girl, right, since I can't have mine. And that started a whole big conflict where Achilles decided he wasn't going to fight anymore. But so Agamemnon is kind of known as being this almost very selfish, self-serving type of leader. He's more in it for himself than he is anyone else. But the other characters we get into play, Cassandra especially, I should probably explain to you guys what her role is in the whole mythology. Cassandra was a Trojan woman, and but I think I might have told you guys before, during the whole Trojan War incident, Apollo was pretty much on the Trojan side, but Apollo fell in love with the young girl Cassandra, and he tried to mate with her pretty much, right? He pretty much did have sex with her, but she stopped the conception, right? She pretty much used contraception during the incident, and Apollo got ticked about it, and he cursed her. So he cursed her. So he cursed her to tell the future accurately. So she's becomes a prophet. She always tells the future accurately, but she's cursed to have no one ever believe her. So like in the whole myth, like she's always telling the Trojans, "Hey, don't do this. Don't do this. We're gonna all die." All this stuff. Nobody ever believes her because of the curse that Apollo puts on her. And as we see in this play, what happens after the war, she's taken again as a concubine by Agamemnon back to his land. So I guess Agamemnon's like the first concubine that would belong to Apollo. I couldn't have her, so I guess now I'll take Cassandra. So so there's always this almost sort of spat between Apollo and Agamemnon here, and the fact that he takes Cassandra is almost like another slap in the face to Apollo. And you know, that's the myth. In case the book didn't really give you a lot of context for that, so in case you guys were wondering, like, who's this character Cassandra, they had some notes at the bottom about it in the book. In case you guys were wondering, like, who is this character in the myths, that was her role. She gets a pretty bad deal, does she not? Right? She's a.
I'm glad you explained her to me, because that's how I was trying to figure her out. I'm like, well, who is she? Now that makes more sense.
Yeah, she's a tragic character in and of herself, because what does she ever do wrong? Right? She pretty much gets violated by Apollo, and then she's cursed because she refuses to have his child, a demigod. You know, and then she's cursed where no one believes her, and then she's taken as a sex slave by Agamemnon back to his place. So she definitely gets a pretty rough go of it. Yeah, so if you ever hear somebody with that name Cassandra or Cassandra, right, just know where the name comes from in the ancient Greek traditions. But that's not it. So that's her role. But this week we're reading two very famous villainous women with literature. One is Clemenestra, who is sort of our femme fatale almost of this play, right? She, you know, Clemenestra, and of course Medea is a really nasty lady in the other play, right? But Clemenestra, we find out that she is mad at her husband because in order to get passage over to Troy, Agamemnon kind of like had to make a deal with another Greek kingdom. So Agamemnon actually gave his daughter away to the king, like for her to be married. And I don't know if I've talked to you guys before about how marriage and all that worked, right? But oftentimes in the Greek days and even the Middle Ages and Renaissance, the way the marriage economy worked, people didn't really get married out of love. Most of the time people would get married, for money reasons. So daughters were always seen to be burdens on their fathers. Like, this is a mouth I have to feed, right? I can't pass down my property or my land or whatever to my daughters. She's a mouth I have to feed. This sounds very cynical, but this is how they thought. But they pretty much thought, this is a mouth I have to feed. And oftentimes these fathers would attach an extra prize on top of his daughter for a marriage arrangement. So a father might give some land away, right? Or maybe some money would come with her. That would entice the man to actually settle down and marry the girl. So oftentimes men would get married for a bunch of different reasons, mostly financial. Of course, they always wanted to pass down their inheritance, like they wanted to have sons. But also, men would get married in order to maybe their social class is one place. Maybe they get married to maybe solidify their standing, or maybe they would get married in order to get richer, to maybe go to the higher class. It's very rare that somebody would get married to someone of a lower class, because what good is that doing you, right? So people would use marriage as a way of advancing. Well, Agamemnon giving away his daughter is that's pretty much how that worked, right? He was trying to get something political out of that. This was a political wedding for him marrying her off. But we find out that she dies, right? So this is why Clemenestra is getting revenge on her husband, right? He dies, and the daughter dies. So Clemenestra is angry at Agamemnon. Plus, she's angry at him for bringing Cassandra home too, right? So between those two things, right, she pretty much guts him, right? So the play starts out kind of boring, right? But pretty close to the end, there's lots of blood and gore and violence and all this stuff. So there's your history. This play is also the first of a trilogy. I should also mention. It's called the Errestian Trilogy, Orestein, the Errestian Trilogy. But this whole trilogy of plays that Aeschylus wrote is about the same family, because evidently I was mostly reading up on this before class. My knowledge on this subject isn't too good, but Agamemnon's parents the whole payback on Agamemnon is almost like a payback because of what his parents did. There was a conflict between siblings with Agamemnon's dad and Agamemnon's uncle, and basically Agamemnon's dad killed his nephews and fed and cooked his nephews in a pie and fed them to his brother. right? As this like really sick trick. Yeah, the Greeks were pretty wild, right? So he fed his own nephews in a pie to his brother, and his brother put a curse on his brother and his future children and stuff. So a lot of the payback that Agamemnon's getting here is because of what happened with Agamemnon's father. If that makes sense.
Was that his children? Like he ate his own children? His brother took his children and fed them to him.
Yes, and of course, unknowingly, right? It was a cruel trick.
Oh wow!
Right, yes, yeah. So this play, there's a trilogy of plays. This whole play is this whole trilogy. Agamemnon's the first of the trilogy, but this is based on this like cycle of revenge that supposedly takes place across multiple generations. The next play is about in the trilogy is about Clemenestra and Agamemnon's son. He actually comes back to get revenge on Clemenestra for killing his dad. And then what he kills Clemenestra in that play. Well, matricide is an awful thing to do too, right? So that causes the third play, right, where there's even more blood and gore. So, you know, it's a whole twisted, messed up series of plays. And that's, you get reference to that in this, like pretty close to the end of Agamemnon. If you guys were wondering, let me turn to the page in the book. If you guys were wondering who this other character was pretty close to the end, Aeschylus, I think is how you say it. If you was wondering who that was, you know, that sort of leads you off into the next play. So pretty wild stuff, to say the least. But this play is pretty interesting in some ways. Like Clemenestra is she's really the first archetype of what we call now a femme fatale character. You guys might know this from films, but a femme fatale character, that when I say the word femme fatale, that's a French term meaning dangerous woman, right? A fatal woman. But this becomes an archetype in lit, right? Where you have this woman who kind of uses her sexuality, right? She uses her wiles in order to seduce men into like a trap, right? So that trap, the woman becomes like a black widow spider, right? She kills her mate, so to speak. Like just like how a black widow spider, like a female spider, will actually kill and eat its mate, its male mate, after they mate. You know, the comparison is with these types of women who use their sex appeal to get what they want out of men and then sort of chew them up. So Clemenestra is definitely probably one of the first examples we get of this sort of character archetype. So you see this archetype a lot in movies. Like I'm actually talking about this in my movie class right now too. If you watch movies, especially a lot of movies from like the 1940s, 50s, you would see this type of character, like this really confident, dangerous woman. Like the hero will fall in love with her, and then she tricks or manipulates them in some way, right? That's pretty much what this character of Clemenestra is doing. So yeah, I gave you guys all this context. How does this maybe if you want to talk about Clemenestra as a character, what do you guys think of the play now after especially this character now after I've went through all this stuff?
Yeah, her character is definitely twisted. I mean, I feel like I could validate some of her actions. But yeah, she's a little twisted, yeah.
I don't feel like she's as bad as Medea.
Yeah, that's a good point, Brianna. If you're comparing the two, right, she's at least not as bad as Medea, right? She doesn't kill her own children, right?
Very true, very true. I concur, Brianna.
Yeah, her whole deal is she's mad because her daughter died for something she thought was unjust. So maybe her motivations here are sympathetic. You gave my daughter away to this man, and now my daughter's dead, right? So you can kind of see her logic here as far as wanting revenge. Yeah, she's calling out a lot of injustices that are happening in this society too, especially with women. So you can read Clemenestra as this almost like proto-feminist heroine of sorts, right? Who's maybe fighting more for the rights of women and stuff. She actually kind of wins out at the end of this play. If it wasn't for the telling you guys that there was a trilogy where she later dies at the end of the play, she kind of takes over, right? She's the queen. She's the one and only ruler. She's the queen. So she kind of has this like almost like badass moment at the end, right? Where she's now the one in charge. But that gets flipped on its head later. But if we just take this play just for what it is, she flips the script, so to speak. So women in Greece go from not having any power to all the power by the end. There's lots of themes in the play. There's themes like rumors, right? There's the chorus and Clemenestra have this whole exchange at the beginning of the play about rumors, because Clemenestra sees the fires lit from the distant lands that suggests that the Greeks actually won the Trojan War. And back then, they didn't have telegrams, or they didn't have good ways to get the news out quick. So there's all kinds of this stuff in the beginning of this play about rumors and lies and how quick people are to believe the news. Well, that's definitely a play. That's definitely a theme that we can even understand today, right? Today we have mass media, but still we kind of always sort of doubt whether the news is accurate or biased or all that stuff, right? I would be remiss not to bring Donald Trump here, right, with his term "fake news." Right. Well, there's this whole idea in this play from 2,500 years ago, which is interesting.
Yeah, as a kid, I never even imagined that the news was not telling the truth. But definitely within the last 8 to 10 years, it's definitely opened my eyes up to a lot of I don't want to say that I'm a conspiracy theorist, but there's a lot of questioning now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not just, it's both sides of the so-called political aisle that'll spin stuff, right? Like you got Fox News on one side spreading right-wing stuff, right? You have somebody like MSNBC, if you're on the left wing, spilling left-wing stuff. If you're somewhere in the middle, what's the truth, right? It kind of raises these questions.
Yeah, and has it always been like that? Like I don't ever remember years ago, it one station being, Republican or Democrat, but definitely now, I mean, it's almost like in your face, like they don't hide anything anymore.
Well, I mean, even if you go back to like the newspaper days, like when newspapers were at their most prominent, like even back then, like certain newspapers had certain tendencies. Like, for instance, the Charleston Gazette here in the state has always had a very democratic sensibility. The Register Herald, which is the Beckley paper, has always kind of had a more Republican sensibility. So, like, even if you go back to like the newspapers, of course, even today, like the New York Times has a very democratic sensibility. Right, so even if you go back to like the newspaper days, even the newspaper days, the media was pretty biased as far as how it reported stories and stuff. It just wasn't as obvious because it wasn't as in our face as it is today.
That makes sense. And it could be that I just didn't really understand politics and things, until I've gotten older. Sorry, I've got you off on a tangent on politics. I apologize.
No, this stuff's relevant to the play we're discussing, because there's a whole theme of it pretty early on. Fox News has always been biased. Like ever since it was first created back in the early 2000s, Fox News has always been a very harsh right-wing channel. CNN is kind of a middle, moderate, leaning left sort of channel. Like Donald Trump painted them like they're a bunch of communists, but in actuality, CNN is far less liberal than MSNBC is. If you're watching all these different channels, and even they lean pretty left. So there's really nowhere in the center that you can actually get good news, which is kind of a scary thought.
Yeah, that is a scary thought for sure. But there's no accuracy anywhere.
Yeah, of course, Donald Trump would spin it that Fox News is always telling the truth too, right? So, even though he uses this term fake news, right, he would say that Fox News is the truth. So you got to be skeptical of all this different political sides. If I have to offer any advice on politics, right, be skeptical of everybody. I say this as a person who is independent. I'm registered as an independent. I'm neither a Democrat or a Republican. So
that's what I'm registered as too. And honestly, I was be honest about it. Whenever, they came around to the high schools when I was 17, and they wanted to get everybody registered for everything. I had no clue, really honestly, of what a Democrat or Republican was. So I was like, independent. Okay, well, that seems like, I'm just for me. So I'm still registered as an independent.
Well, if you're registered as an independent, you have some more freedom as a voter. Like during the May elections, like in the May elections are usually along party lines. So you'll vote for like the Democratic candidates who will be running in the general election in November, or the Republican candidates. If you're an independent, you can pick which ballot you want to vote off of. So you can be like, give me the Republican ballot, or give me the Democratic ballot. So you actually have your choice of ballots that you can pick from if you're an independent voter here in West Virginia. So it actually, being an independent actually gives you a little bit more power as a voter, if that makes sense.
I didn't even know that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, like let's say that you wanted to support somebody for town judge or whatever, right? But they're only running on the Republican ballot. Well, you can be like, give me the Republican ballot. So
So now could you go back and forth? Like say if you had, somebody that was running for Board of Education, or somebody was running for commissioner, and could you do like a Republican and a Democrat? Could you vote for both?
Some of those that you mentioned, like a Board of Education, those are nonpartisan. So those are on both parties' ballots. Yeah, so Board of Education or Supreme Court and stuff like that, those are what are called nonpartisan positions. So everybody votes for those.
Oh, okay. Let's see, Jeff, it shows how much I really know about politics.
And I'm teaching you guys some political science tonight, so you never know what you're going to learn when you come in here, right? Zach, Brianna, have the two of us lost you two and are aside?
I'm not really lost. I just don't have much to add.
Yep. So all of you register to vote, switch to independent. Gives you more power. That's the only thing I'll say. Okay. Unless you feel really strongly one way or the other, which I do not. So, yeah, I mean, getting back to the play, like rumor, false news, all this stuff is a theme pretty early on. Yeah, on page 121, you get a lot of that. The chorus says, "What good are the oracles to men? Words, more words, and the hurt comes on us. Endless words. And a seer's techniques have brought us terror and the truth." So that's again part of the whole that line's again part of the whole nobody believes Cassandra because she's cursed by Apollo plot thread. So yeah, that's Agamemnon. Like I said, Aeschylus, like he probably should have been the first person we read because Sophocles and innovated on a lot. Like Oedipus the King and Antigone, I think it's pretty safe to say are better pieces of art just because there's so much more nuance to them. Like this play is a little rough around the edges, but it's cool though because you get a lot of this mythology out of it. Like I think Aeschylus is pretty much our main source for this idea of what happened to Agamemnon after he got home from the Trojan War. So hopefully my explaining the myth to you brought some more depth to the play to the three of you.